Many of them have, sir. In fact, some of Africa's most terrible warmongers, men who have drenched large areas of Africa in unnecessary blood and suffering, are directly descended from some of our greatest emperors of 600, 500, or even 1,000 years ago.
This is the American president.
Say, I would like to tell you about a man called Jonas Savimbi. Jonas Savimbi is a descendant of some of the greatest Angola kings. In fact, the entire land called Angola was a breeding place of kingship in Africa. The word Ngola means a king, and Angola means land of many kings.
I must say, the way that the evidence that I'm uncovering is going, and it's going there very fast, and it syncs so much with what you're saying, is that a race from the stars, a reptilian race, interbred with humanity, they created crossbreed bloodlines, which became the middlemen, the demigods, the royal kings and lines and ruling power in the ancient world, and through interbreeding has become the presidents, the ruling people at the top of the power structures of banking, of politics, of the military, of all areas of our lives, of business, all of it. Is that the way that you have seen it yourself?
Yes, sir. You know, Mr. Ike, I wish for one moment I could contradict you. But for the last 40 years, I have observed an extremely disconcerting phenomenon in South Africa and in other parts of Africa as well. And this is the phenomenon. You find a rising black leader, a real leader amongst men, a ferocious activist for the rights of his people. This man starts something, whether it's a revolution or whatever, he starts it. And you look at his ancestry, because in Africa we look very closely at a man's ancestry. And you find that this man is nothing. Although he is doing such great deeds, he is actually a descendant of very peasant people. And you are worried. And all of a sudden, this black man will come to a sudden violent end, and a person who is totally new will take his place. And when you look at the ancestors of these people, this man, you find that he, or even she, is a person of very, very ancient African royalty. Now, let me show you. There was this war in Rhodesia, and many people got killed there. And there was a very fierce and dedicated general. His name was Tongogara. And Tongogara fought in Rhodesia. And just when victory was won, Tongogara was killed in a terrific explosion. Somebody put a bomb thing in his car and killed him very badly. But wait, Tongogara had been a descendant of a blacksmith. His surname, Tongo Gara, means powerful hammer. Now, who replaced Tongogar? A man called Robert Mugabe. Now you can't get more royal than that. Mugabe is descended from ancient Mashona kings, and what is more, he knows it. Always a leader is removed, and when the power really comes, a new leader descended from some faraway monarch or tribal chieftain 2 centuries or 3 centuries ago comes on the scene. Again and again there seems to be this particular force which elevates its descendants over ordinary human beings. I can give you hundreds of cases of this. Now, sir, talk about a tradition of shape-shifting. African kings, even now, and even ordinary tribal chieftains, especially in times of crisis, often spread the story through the land that they are able to change shape at will. There was a time when the South African government created the various Bantu homelands, and these homelands were ruled by those tribal chiefs who were agreeable to the apartheid system. Now, some of these chiefs were very unpopular with the people on the ground, and so to build a charisma around themselves, these chiefs used to tell people that they are capable of changing shape at will. It was spoken about a certain African chief in the Transkei who became one of the first rulers of one of several black homelands there, that one day his enemies were looking for him to assassinate him, and when they broke into his house, they found a huge lion sitting on the floor, and this lion growled at them. And because of that story, because even today word of mouth is a very powerful media of communication in black communities, all enemies of that particular chief left him well alone because they feared his shape-changing powers.
The final question on this particular video, Credo, because we've got a lot more to say on others. Why is it that if the Chitahuli are all around us, which I certainly feel they are, and they're operating certain bloodlines, now some people see them shapeshift. That's absolutely without doubt. I mean, so many people I've met all over the world have seen it. Into reptiles and then back again, the George Bushes, the Henry Kissingers, these key people. Why don't most people see it?
First of all, I have said to you, Mr. Ike, that we human beings have got a blind spot in our brains, and this is what the Chitauli and other alien nasty boys are exploiting. Look, sir, if we are a crowd and we are standing on a city street, we will see a man suddenly grow an extra arm, and many of us will see that, but will refuse to accept what they see. I have seen, sir, people going through severe trauma in train accidents, in car accidents, but they refuse to accept what they went through. I have seen women who have been raped several times, ferociously refusing to admit what they underwent. I've seen it many times. And these alien creatures know our weakness. They know that very often we human beings tend to censor what we see. If you are an educated professor and you see a spook, your educated mind will refuse to accept what it has seen. You will reject it and throw it to the back burner of your brain, and it will stay there. Hundreds of us see very strange things every day, but we refuse to accept what we see. Say, one of the things that a trainee Sangoma has got to learn, it is the ability to see. If I am standing here and looking at that bush over there, and I see something odd there, I must know what I've seen. But wait, sir, there is something else, something very, 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 very important, which I and many other thinkers in Africa have found. Mr. Ike, whenever you talk about such things, people call you paranoid. Mm-hmm. But no, you are really more sane than they really are. Say, there are certain vaccination things that are done to our children which rob them of the ability of seeing spiritual entities. Believe me, I can prove this. In Zululand, we were sometimes called before our chiefs, our Inkos, and we were told that there is a great smallpox coming to the land and that all children must be vaccinated. Do you know that my mother's father, my grandfather, used to dodge that? He said that the white man's Mutwa, the white man's vaccination, makes you blind. And if you are to look after my cattle, you must not go to the trading store to get your vaccination. But wait, the school inspectors used to come into the land and check each child for signs of vaccination or lack of it. Now, do you know what we used to do, Mr. David? Our grandmothers used to give us great pain in order to save our spiritual eyes. They used to heat grains of maize, and then they would heat this grain of maize, and using a piece of wood as tweezers, place it firmly against the skin of the child. So when the school inspector came, he saw these blisters and assumed that the child had been vaccinated. But in fact, it had not. And this was done to us many, many times. And I noticed that school children in mission schools who had been vaccinated for smallpox or for measles could not see spiritual entities at all. A ndondo, that is a flying saucer, a spuputeka, would fly through the sky at great speed and be seen by many men and women. But the child who had been vaccinated would see nothing. And I noticed this hundreds of times.
Well, what you just said about the vaccines and their effect, shutting us down spiritually and multidimensionally, is fantastic, given that no matter what your background, creed, culture, parents on every inch of the planet almost are being pressurized to have their children vaccinated more and more and more. And to summarize what you've been saying, and indeed it's so much in line with what I've come to the conclusion about as well, an extraterrestrial race, reptilian race, disconnected us from our true magnificent senses in a long, long ancient world. They've been manipulating us ever since, and the more that time has passed, the less we've realized this is going on. And now we're at a point where we are in a prison without bars, a massive prison, and we don't even know we're in prison. We don't even know who the jailers are. Indeed, when the jailers are exposed, people just laugh and ridicule and all that stuff. So we're in an unbelievable situation. And we're in a jail we deny we're in. And there are jailers we deny exist. And we call it freedom.
Yes, sir. Yes. You know, Mr. David, one of the reasons why I've joined forces with you is because I have serious reason to believe, and I will repeat these words until somebody shuts my mouth in death. I have serious reason to believe that on this planet things are coming to a head, and our invisible jailers are going to fight tooth and nail to prevent this. Say, our people say that the blackest night often heralds the brightest dawn. The human being, captive as he is, slave as it is trying to fight back. And this is where the crunch is going to come. I believe that we are not far away from the bloodiest crunch in the world. And I will tell you, my visions tell me that we are going to be struck with the most terrible sword of all, the sword of money. Something is going to be done to money which will bring us all to the level of beggars. And do you know why, sir? Let me tell you. I used to work for big game hunters in Kenya. And one of them was an Italian gentleman. This Italian gentleman was such a powerful hunter, a white hunter. He used to shoot 2 bull elephants a day in Kenya, and he used to celebrate the shooting with a huge bottle. He called it a magnum of wine. I remember him pouring some of the wine onto the heads of the dead elephants. And then one day we went with this man to the land now called Rwanda, which used to be called Rwanda-Urundi. We went up the mountain, and there, accompanied by pygmies, he shot a gorilla, a huge ngangi with silver fur all along its back. And the great beast died so bravely that this Italian hunter started weeping like a woman. He fired us, told us that the job is finished, and he never hunted again. Sir, what I'm trying to tell you is this: that something inside us human beings is beginning to fight back against the Chitauri. Something inside us human beings is beginning to say no. And the Chitauri are going to drag us all right into hell itself. Let me show you. Who would have thought in the 1950s, during the time of the Cold War, when everybody was expecting a bloody Third World War between Stalinist Russia and the Western nations, when British, American, and even Russian nuclear bombs were exploding all over the place, who would have thought that a few decades after that, there would come a time when a group of young men and women, the people of Greenpeace, would sail their ship, the Greenpeace Warrior, into a nuclear zone to prevent the French from testing one more atomic bomb. This tells us that something inside the human soul is fighting back. 40 years ago, it was once a very glamorous thing to kill animals. Today, a big game hunter like my Italian friend would never dare show himself in some hotels. He would be spat at and he would be beaten up by people because the hero of yesterday, the Bwana Banduki, the gun Bwana of 40 years ago, is today a murderer. Now, things are coming to a crunch. 40 years ago, nobody cared a damn about the environment. People did not even know that there existed such a thing as an environment or a food chain. Today, there are people who would rather lose their lives than not save a buck which is drowning in a river. A God is being born inside us, all of us. But herein lies the danger. We must be aware of the Chitauri. They are real entities. They leave scars on human bodies. They kill people. They are murdering South Africa even as we are talking now. Every word you and I are speaking now is spoken too late, Mr. David. AIDS is rampaging through our communities. And I have found a new disease in Mutwa, which nobody is talking about even. It is 20 times more vicious than AIDS. It is called Ebola. Oh my God. And we must please be aware. Let nobody laugh when we talk about conspiracy theories. But there is one thing, sir, that I beg that you and others like you should discard. Una momento, as they say in South America. Stop calling the conspiracy a theory, sir. Theories do not kill people, Mr. David. Theories do not murder innocent children. Theories do not put multiple murderers of Kabila's stripe into power in countries.
Absolutely.
Theories are just ideas floating in the air. The conspiracy is real. It is there and it kills.
The staggeringly intelligent, the staggeringly wise, and the staggeringly knowledgeable Credo Mutwa. And his knowledge the world needs to know. Not only is Credo a man who has gathered this enormous knowledge together, he's a man with the courage and the foresight and the wisdom to know that the world needs to hear this, even though most of the world, particularly those who run the world, don't want anyone to hear this. But if we're going to be free, and we are, then we need to know all there is to know, and not just that which the few want us to think is the world, when a very different world is unfolding all around us every day. In the next video, we're going to be taking the story on with Credo and showing how these reptilian bloodlines and this Chitauri, this reptilian group, expanded their power across the world, took over Africa and other great continents, and today are the ruling elite that controls planet Earth. And by knowing that, and by knowing how it's done and how it works, we can take control and power back into our lives for
from those who have controlled us and this planet for thousands of years. It's a great time to be alive. From Africa for now. Thank you, and thanks for listening to a remarkable man. Hello, and welcome for a second time to Africa, the countryside of South Africa, just outside Johannesburg, for the second in our series with Credo Mutwa, the Zulu Sanusi, or shaman, as many people around the world would call him, the keeper of the history, the true history of Africa and the Zulu people, and the official storyteller, in other words, the carrier of the knowledge and the symbolic stories of the Zulu nation. He is, without any question in my mind whatsoever, the most remarkable, astonishing man it's been my honor to meet. And to share his incredible knowledge has been a time that I personally will never forget. In the first of these videos, we discussed with Credo the story of the Chitahuli, the reptilian extraterrestrial race from another world that came to the earth in the far ancient world, that brought advanced knowledge which built many of the, according to conventional history, unexplainable, magnificent structures all across the world, thousands and thousands of years old, and also interbred with humanity, creating hybrid crossbreed bloodlines. These bloodlines, as my own research for books like The Biggest Secret and Credo's immense knowledge of the African history, which he's gathered in his nearly 80 years of traveling this vast and amazing continent, both correlate the same story, remarkably, that this Chitahuli, this reptilian race, interbred with humanity, and the bloodlines became the almost demigods, the royal ruling lines of the ancient world, particularly in the ancient Near and Middle East, which were the middlemen, if you like, between the extraterrestrial gods to which people were literally sacrificed, and the people in general. And as the genealogical research is showing, these crossbreed bloodlines, the Nephilim, as the Old Testament of the Bible calls them, the result of the interbreeding between the sons of God, as the Bible calls them, the sons of the gods in the true translation, and earth women, the marriage, the bringing together of the sons of God and the daughters of men. This Nephilim crossbreed race, as the genealogy has shown, came out of that area and into Europe to become the aristocracy and the royal families of Europe, and then through the British Empire became the ruling bloodlines of most of the world. In fact, today, almost all of the world. Like the 42 presidents out of the hundreds of millions of people who have been Americans since the Declaration of Independence in 1776, 42 have become president. They're all related. What? And they go back to these ruling aristocratic families, which eventually go back to the crossbreed, interrelationship, intercourse between the Chitahuli, the Anunnaki, as some accounts call them, and human beings. And it's the British Empire that we're going to talk about now in its relationship to taking over the planet in a way that today is now global. The British Empire became the British Empire because this network of bloodlines, which had become known as the Illuminati, centered itself in London at operational level, particularly after the arrival from Holland of William of Orange, who became King of England in 1689. And from that time, he signed the charter that created the Bank of England, and the banking system as we know it started to expand and emerge. But from that time, the British Empire and the other European empires came into being, and they took the planet over. Now, one immensely important area that they completely controlled and raped was the fantastic continent of Africa. And to look at how Africa was taken over by this Illuminati Chitahuli reptilian crossbreeds, and indeed the reptilian race itself that's behind it all, is to see how the world has been taken over, the methods used, the way it was done, the manipulations. And what we're going to talk to Credo about now, among many other things, is the way that the continent of Africa was hijacked by the Illuminati. And I asked him first to tell me the story of how this great continent was taken over.
So, there are mysteries in this world that we as thinking human beings must look into. And one of these mysteries is this. There is overwhelming evidence of the fact that before Africa was actually colonized by the white people from Europe, it was first prepared by strange people for this colonization. When the first Portuguese ships started sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, strange beings appeared amongst our people, strange human-like creatures, usually creatures of great height, abnormally tall, human-like beings, some of them with only 1 foot, appeared amongst our people, and they started doing things there which made it easier for the colonialists to invade us and to conquer us.
What were they like in terms of their colour and skin, Credo?
Say, we do not know, but there are those who described them as very, very white, chalk white in appearance. This went on for so often that it became traditional to our people to represent these beings with white chalk. You found masks amongst our mask makers which were smeared entirely in white chalk to represent these creatures. These creatures were usually about 8 feet tall, very, very slender, and they used to wear robes made of the tanned hides of certain type of antelope, usually the intensely black sable antelope.
What name did the people give to them?
We gave them the name Izilo Zengubo, the beasts of the terrible blanket. These creatures were dressed exactly like Christian monks, with hoods and long robes. In fact, I will draw you a likeness of one of them as it is shown in a rock painting. Now, these creatures used to live in holes in the ground, or in underground caverns, or in gullies over which a roof of logs and vegetation as well as sods was placed. And it may be of interest to you, sir, that Portuguese explorers and Portuguese seamen used to see these one-legged creatures hopping about and sometimes disappearing into the ground as if by magic. And these creatures were called by the Portuguese sailors monopods. They wore a long robe that reached down to their ankles, and they appeared as they moved through the bush as if they only had one leg. Monopods were seen in Africa, and they were also seen in America before America was colonized by the white people.
Among the Native Americans?
Yes, sir. One of the things that amaze me is that the story of America and the story of Africa was the same. It is said, sir, that these monopods introduced certain knowledge to our people. They actually prepared our people mentally for what was to come. For example, these monopods, these beasts of the terrible blanket, used to wear a cross-like ornament on their chests as a charm, a cross made of either gold or silver. Doesn't it amaze you that when the Native Americans saw the cross painted on the sails of Christopher Columbus's ships, they recognized it as a sacred object? Let me tell you, sir, exactly the same happened in South Africa, where our people were made familiar with the cross long before the white man set foot in Africa. And when our people saw this cross, this time brought by missionaries, they recognized it as a sacred object. In other words, now, I don't know how to put this there, but can you put it for me? Our people were prepared long beforehand to recognize certain Christian symbols and Judaic symbols. And when they saw them in the hands of the colonists later, they saw them for what they were. This is one of the reasons why, Mr. ICKE, Africans accepted and protected Christian missionaries, even while fighting a life and death struggle against white colonialism. How is it that a man would accept the religion of an invader while at the same time fighting a life and death battle against the encroachments that this invader was making into his native land? This happened in America, and this happened in Africa, and the sources of this acceptance were the same. I wish I could put this in much better English than I'm using now, because I feel it is important.
I think you're putting it very clearly, that it seems that this Chitahuli were going around the world preparing for the occupation from the Illuminati Center in London and Europe of these various areas like Native America and Africa.
Yes, sir. The story, you see, a great fraud is being committed in educational circles, in that the educationists in their ivory towers force our young people to look at the colonization of Africa and America as if they were two separate incidents. But certain factors in this colonization were the same in Africa and the same in America, and they achieved exactly the same results. This is why I always argue that the conspiracy, the international conspiracy, began long before colonial times in Africa and in the Americas. And the results were the same. Look at this. Here is the great Zulu king, Shaka. Shaka is a warrior second to none. Shaka is also a prophet second to none. Shaka welcomes white people to his empire of Natal. Shaka allows missionaries to operate freely through his country. And when Shaka dies, before Shaka died, he warned his half-brother Dinga that he must under no circumstances attack the white people, and that he must allow missionaries to operate freely amongst the Zulu people. In fact, during the reign of King Dinga and Shaka's half-brother, two missionaries, Reverend Halstead and Reverend Owen, had a mission station within sight of King Dinga's great village. But wait, sir, let me point out one thing. These missionaries were converting our people to Christianity, and they often went out of their way to criticize and undermine the king's authority in the eyes of their converts. In other words, we have an amazing phenomena here where a great king is being undermined by the very people he has allowed to preach freely in his country. Why? Not a single South African scholar has ever asked himself why. Why were our people so seemingly stupid as to allow a foreign religion into their country? Now, let me show you, sir, two horrendous tragedies. When the Belgians colonized the Congo, which is today the Democratic Republic of the Congo, King Leopold declared that the Congo was to be his personal property. And King Leopold and his men tortured and murdered several million black Congolese people in an act of genocide equal only to what the Nazis were later to do to the Jews. But under savage ill treatment, under savage torture and humiliation, the Congolese, virtual slaves in their country, still respected Christian missionaries and followed them and gained hope from them. And in 1907, this time in the country today known as Namibia, the Germans embarked on a policy of genocide against the warrior people known as the Hereros. They murdered so many hereros. They tortured and slaughtered so many men and women of that nation that until as recently as the 1940s, Herero women were still so traumatized by what had happened that they were not producing any young at all. But in spite of the hideous genocide committed by General Van Trotha, in spite of the multiple murders, the Herero people clung to the Christian faith. Why? Exactly why? I now come to my people, the Zulus. When King Dingaan murdered the four-tracker leader Piet Retief, the act was watched by Reverend Owen and Reverend Halstead from their mission station, which was built on a hill overlooking King Dingaan's great village. Halstead and Owen, unharmed by Dingaan, decided to flee from the place after that. And Dingaan was deeply sorrowed that his favorite creatures had decided to leave him. And King Taitwayo, the warrior king who won the Battle of Isandlwane in 1875 or thereabouts, never harmed missionaries. And a king who followed Taitwayo, King Dinizulu, who was brutally tortured by the English, had a great friend in Bishop Colenso, a Christian bishop, and his daughters, one of whom was called Mary. Although he had suffered so much at the hands of the British authorities, King Dinizulu never abandoned his white Christian friends. They comforted him, and he depended desperately upon them and their Bible in his darkest hours.
Would the same basic story, Credo, be true of how the British or the Illuminati based in Britain took over Australia too?
Yes, I have found exactly the same stories. The Aborigines, like Africans, were deliberately softened up long before they were colonized by the white people. There were men, mysterious men, who often posed as gods, who undermined the will of the Aborigines to resist the encroachment of the colonialists.
It's also interesting that Captain Cook, who is the guy who's supposed to have, quote, discovered Australia and New Zealand, that area of the world,
yes,
was actually sponsored and funded and in fact controlled by the Royal Society, which was a Freemasonic and is a Freemasonic science operation based in London.
Yes, sir. Let me show you another interesting thing. There is a man I have been investigating in a vein for over 40 years now. A man who committed acts of hideous genocide upon our people here in South Africa. A man of whom historians are so fond that he is practically a white cow whom you may not dare to point a finger at. If you see me sitting in front of you, a man who was demonized over 30 years ago by the South African news media, it was because I asked questions about this white man, Sir George Grey. Who was Sir George Grey? What was he? Was he a Freemason? Was he an Illuminati? How is it that this Sir George Grey, who is the actual founder of the most oppressive laws that British colonialism ever settled our people with, apartheid was laid down by Sir George Grey. The carrying of identity papers was laid down by Sir George Grey in the 1850s, in the last century. And Sir George Grey dealt our kings a mortal blow. But let me first tell you, this man was sent from London to quell a Maori rebellion in New Zealand, which had defeated the efforts of military men. The Maori were unstoppable. Their rebellion was blazing like a bushfire through New Zealand. But when George Grey was sent to New Zealand, he managed to quell this rebellion with very, very little loss of life. What did George Grey do? I have never been able to find a book which tells me exactly what did George Grey do in New Zealand in order to pacify the Maoris who had beaten the efforts of the British soldiers. Because that same George Grey was brought from New Zealand to South Africa in order to quell a great rebellion by the Xhosa people. And George Grey used outright trickery in order to force the Xhosa people to actually destroy themselves. George Grey deliberately and cold-bloodedly tricked the Xhosa people into slaughtering their own cattle, burning their own crops. It is one of the saddest stories of our country's blood-drenched history. And almost overnight, George Grey reduced the Xhosa people of the Eastern Cape into a nation of dying skeletal starvelings. Because after George Grey had manipulated the Xhosas with raw trickery into destroying their crops, destroying their cattle, he practically had them on the plate. Hunger, raw hunger and starvation achieved what military might had failed to achieve after many, many embattled decades. George Grey was a psychologist par excellence. George Grey was a trickster who knew the native races and he knew how to exploit their beliefs to bring about their own destruction. Let me show you what Grey did. One day, when great tension was boiling up in the Cape, and when the colonialists were threatened by yet another border war between themselves and the Xhosa people, a number of Xhosa women, amongst them a Sangoma, a priestess diviner, called Nongaus were tending crops when they heard voices calling out to them in the bush. Nongaus, because she was a spiritual person and a healer, responded to these voices. She went together with her sister Nonteto to investigate, and they found a deep hollow in the ground, and from this hollow they heard the voices coming. And as the women knelt next to the hollow, the three amazing figures emerged from the grass. Tall men wearing long black robes made of animal skin, with very big hoods on their heads, appeared out of the hollow, and one of their faces were painted white, or so it seemed to the terrified Xhosa women. And these men were unusually tall, and they told the woman Nongaus, whom they distinguished by her attire as a traditional healer, that she must go to the Xhosa people and tell them to start killing their cattle and start destroying their crops. Mr. ICKE, I want to show you this book, a book which was published many years ago, a book written by me, and which made me one of the most hated black men in South Africa by the white establishment. In this book, I write, amongst other things, about a man called Sir George Grey. And in this book, I questioned certain things about this man, because Sir George Grey was the creator of race discrimination and apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid was not really created by the Afrikaners. It was created by this man many, many years ago.
Well, Sir George Grey was Illuminati, a black magician, and fits the bill exactly with what happened in all these other countries you're talking about.
Say, when I questioned this, when I raised questions in this book about Sir George Grey, I was savagely attacked by nearly every professor in various universities of South Africa.
The intellectual prostitutes.
Yes. The liars in ivory towers, as I call them. I said that the Xhosa did not commit suicide in 1857. They were murdered. They were manipulated by Sir George Grey into destroying themselves.
Isn't it interesting, Credo? I've noticed this myself, that the story you've just told about how those people were manipulated to kill their cattle and what have you, is mirrored again and again in the story that has spawned religion after religion. I mean, whether it's Mohammed or whether it's Joseph Smith with the Mormons, again and again, the initiator has a vision or an interaction with some guard figure or angel, and bingo, they get told to do certain things, and the rest is history.
Yes, sir. And what is most interesting is that these interesting angels have suddenly disappeared in recent times. You no longer hear of an angel coming to tell some prophet to establish a new religion. No. Where have they gone? They carefully choose certain times. Now, Sir George Grey, let me go back to him. He manipulated the Xhosa people into killing themselves. And a poor woman, Nongawuse, became the scapegoat, because in every evil thing that has been done in Africa by the white colonialists, as well as by the Arab colonialists, there are always black scapegoats who are left holding the blame. And in this case, Nongawuse was. According to South African official history books, we are told that Nongawuse had had a dream that her people must kill their cattle, her people must destroy their crops. And as a result of Nongawuse's dream, thousands died. And another lie was added to compound this infamous lie. We were told that Nongawuse had been a child when she had this dream. But that's a lie, sir. Photographs of Nongawuse taken after the terrible disaster show her as a mature woman who is wearing a beaded blanket, and on that beaded blanket it is shown clearly in beaded patterns that she was a Sangoma who had undergone several initiations. She was not a girl, but a spinster woman in her 25th year. And Nongawuse had not had a dream whatsoever. She had seen apparitions. She had seen men who posed as gods, who were disguised as supernatural beings, and she had not been alone. And another thing, the Xhosa people would never have listened to the word of any mature child on a serious matter like this, because to all African people, cattle and crops were not regarded as their property, but rather as the property of the ancestral spirits. Now, Nongawuse became a scapegoat. For a long, long time, our people hated Nongawuse for the dream she had supposedly had. And after I had brought questions about this story, after I had been torn apart by newspaper men, Nongawuse's story was suddenly changed and totally omitted in South African history books. I can show you some of these books where this story doesn't occur at all.
Credo, is this story that you're telling in this one incident, can you repeat that again and again across southern Africa as the Europeans took over? Was it a method they constantly used?
Yes, sir. Yes. You see, I can tell you a lot of things that were done. Some of the bloody wars which were started in South Africa between white men and black men were actually engineered by supposedly ancestral spirits, where a king suddenly saw an apparition. Now let me tell you, sir, one of these amazing stories, of which there are well over 100. And it is a true story that is known to every student of history in the land known as Lesotho. There was a great king, sir. The king's name was Mutwa. Mutwa was a priest king. He was a man who was both a healer and a king. Mutwa was getting old, and he had received many wounds in battle, fighting to protect his people against invaders. One day, Mutwa was in his house when somebody knocked on the door frame of the house. And Mutwa asked the intruder to come in. And into their hut there came a frightening being. A being whose face was as white as the face of death. A being which wore a hood over its head. A being with unnaturally wide shoulders. A being who wore a long robe of sable antelope skin. This being squatted near the entrance of the hut in which Mutwa was. And the being told Mutwa that he was to take one of his golden earrings, the earrings of kingship, and go on foot for a long distance to find a young man known as Dipoko, and to give him this earring. But what are you saying, great one? Said Mutwa, utterly terrified by this unearthly being. You are saying that I, Mutwa, must go and find this boy and make him my successor? And the being said, yes, we, your forefathers, order you to do this. Mutwa was thunderstruck. He tried to argue, because Mutwa had sons whom he was hoping would succeed him after death. Now he was now being told to go and seek out a strange young man and make him future king of the Basotho people. And as Mutwa tried to speak, the terrible tall being stood up in the hut and threw a handful of black powder on into the fireplace. There was a terrible flash, a burst of white smoke, and as Mutwa shielded his eyes, the being left the hut. On the following day, Mutwa told his people this in a council meeting, and the people advised Mutwa to obey. You are the king, Mutwa. You have been our king for a long time. You are blameless and you are as brave as a lion. But against the gods, what can you do? And thus it was that King Mutwa was given a tame ox by his people, and he rode on the back of this ox, accompanied by 2 of his best warriors, and he went out to seek this strange boy whom he he had been ordered to make future king of the Basutus. He found the boy with his companions high up on a mountain. The boy was a bandit. He lived by stealing cattle from rich men. He was a typical black Robin Hood. And Mutlomi greeted this boy, Dipoko, and he pinned his golden earring to Dipoko's right ear and said, I am commanded by the spirits of my forefathers to appoint you, Dipoko, future king of the Basutu. I am told that you are going to make this nation great. I am told that you are going to protect it. I, Mutlomi, the armed one, have spoken. Mutlomi left Dipoko, and Mutlomi sickened and died some time later. And the man named Dipoko, a young man, a cattle-stealing bandit, became known as King Mushweshwe, the first of the Basutu. As the so-called God had spoken, it so did happen. Mushweshwe, who had now discarded the name of Dipoko, which means disappointment, and assumed the name Mushweshwe, which means the barber or the beard shaver. Mushweshwe himself started seeing visions, and he started obeying the instructions of these visions that he should build a great nation out of the Basutu nation. He collected together all the fugitives who had fled from the wars in the Cape. He collected together all the refugees who had fled from the wars by Shaka in Natal. And he molded them into the nation known as the Basutu nation, which today inhabits the land called Lesotho. But wait, there is more to the story of Mushweshwe. Mushweshwe was under attack by the Afrikaners. And one day he received another vision, a vision that told him that if his people were to be saved, he had to place himself and his people under the protection of Queen Victoria. And he did just that. When I was a child, when I was a young scholar, the land today known as Lesotho was known as the Basutu Land Protectorate. Here was a king actually destroying his sovereignty as a ruler. Mushweshwe enjoyed the loyalty of his people. Mushweshwe was greatly loved by the nation that he had formed. Mushweshwe had not really needed to make himself the subordinate of the British Empire, but he did on advice of visions that he had.
My God, you can see how it was done.
But there is more, Mr. David. Sir, I think these men were secretly manipulated. I think these men had their fears and secret beliefs played against them. It is the easiest thing, sir, to manipulate a man who rules a country and who suddenly feels himself unsecure. For example, the British appear to have pursued a double-edged strategy in South Africa. They did it in Natal, they did it in Lesotho, and they did it in Swaziland and in Mutwa. What did they do? They used to manipulate the white Afrikaner settlers, the Boers, into fighting the native people. And then they used to send agents to the embattled black kings to tell these black kings that the best thing that they could do is to place their people and themselves under the protection of the British Empire.
Problem, reaction, solution.
Yes, sir. Now, let me ask you, sir, how did a black king know that the English were the most militarily powerful people at that time? The Africans only saw their immediate enemy, the Afrikaners. The black people only saw but here we have a situation where a black king learns from someone about the powerful ships, sea-going ships, and the huge guns that the British have got. And this king is then advised to place himself and his people under the protection of the British. It was a strategy that the British pursued in different forms deep into Africa. They often won huge swaths of mineral-rich territory without even firing a shot. They had gun runners who smuggled bundles of muskets, power muskets, and even Sniper rifles to black tribes. And wars between the Afrikaners and the blacks came into being in Lesotho. One of the reasons that forced Mutwa to make Lesotho a protectorate under Great Britain was because he feared the repeated attacks which the angry Boers were launching against him, because some of his people were attacking the Boer farmers and stealing their cattle.
Can we talk about people like David Livingstone and those that charted the interior of Africa, etc.? Because it seems, Credo, without question, we're looking at an unbroken string here, with one element of the takeover following another. So surely those, quote, heroes of Britain that charted the interior of Africa must have been involved in the story.
They were. In fact, I can say to you now, sir, that the man in whose home Livingstone stayed, namely Reverend Moffat, was the one man who was grinding down King Hama's mind. He was the one man who used to send books and newspapers to Khama. They were living in the land of the Botswana, and they lived alone, a missionary and his wife. Reverend Moffat had a family of children at Kuruman in the Northern Cape. And Reverend Moffat received Livingstone. Reverend Moffat, because he was viewed by the Botswana as a man of God, could do what he liked in the land of the Botswana. He carved himself a huge stretch of land. He planted any vegetables or fruits there that he chose. Early in his arrival, he found that area teeming with buffaloes, which is why it is called Kuruman. It's really a corruption of the Botswana word Udumane, the gathering place of the buffalo. Moffat used to welcome explorers and hunters, many of whom traveled alone through South Africa. And these hunters and adventurers, people like Reverend Campbell and others, were going through South Africa, exploring. Some of them wrote books about the local customs and the local tribes that they encountered. And I think these explorers were much more than what they seem.
So how is Christianity used? We talked about the fact that the beasts of the terrible blanket, these strange people that appeared before the Europeans, had introduced all the symbols and what have you that prepared people for Christianity in Africa. How was it used once the Christianity people, the Christian religion, arrived?
I will tell you, sir, from what I saw as a young child, the Christian religion, or rather the missionaries that brought it, behaved like dictators. They ill-treated our people. They humiliated them. And they stole huge tracts of land from our people using the name of Jesus Christ. I want to give you this historical fact, sir. If you go to Natal, near Durban, and you come to a place called Marian Hill, near Durban, you will find one of the biggest and one of the oldest mission schools in South Africa. Marian Hill sits on huge tracts of land. These tracts of land were stolen from the Zulu people by a missionary called Chimlet. And even to this day, the people of Marian Hill can tell you that that man was not just a missionary, he was also a crook and a pitiless exploiter of the black people. He was a monk, but he was much more than a monk. It was said that this Chimlet worshipped not God, not the Virgin Mary, but Satan himself.
So that fits like a glove from the way the Illuminati work. And the other thing that must have happened, fundamental in so many ways, is that the original knowledge, the knowledge that you carry and people like you carry, must have been destroyed, pushed underground, and basically the true story of history lost.
Yes, sir. Let me tell you what the missionaries did. The missionaries used to employ the tactic of preaching the so-called gospel to our people. And at the same time, they used to manipulate our people into partying with some of their holiest relics. Please, sir, there is in London a place that I saw near the London Docks in an obscure street. It is a heavily guarded warehouse which belongs to the British Museum of Humankind. We were allowed to visit this place when I was in London in 1970, in 1997. And there, in that warehouse, I saw cupboard after cupboard after cupboard filled with priceless African artifacts in ivory, in bronze, in various indigenous woods, and sometimes in iron and in gold. I saw royal bangles from dead kings, bangles made of brass and bronze, bangles which showed every sign that they had been removed by force from the arms of dead men and dead women. All these things, I was told, had been collected by Theophilus Chepstone and the London Missionary Society and were sent to this museum where no African is allowed to view them. I was lucky because I was accompanied by a white woman whose father, I suspect, was a Freemason. Now, let me tell you, sir, what the missionaries did also. The missionaries established hospitals in their mission station. Reverend Moffat had a hospital in that mission station. And when an African was brought there, sick unto death, the missionary used to tell this African that as a condition to his entering the hospital, he first had to be baptized as a Christian. And also as another condition for entering the hospital and receiving missionary treatment, the sick African had to surrender all artifacts from his ancestors that he had in his possession. Yeah. One day, sir, my grandfather Zibo had an accident. He had bought himself an ox wagon, but he did not know how to control it. And one day the ox wagon plunged off a cliff, and my grandfather was badly injured. And when he was taken to a mission hospital in the west of Zululand, the first thing that the missionary said to my grandfather was this, that he knew the missionary, that my grandfather owned a heap of metal objects which he kept in one of his huts. And that as a condition for receiving treatment for his broken bones, he had to surrender all that metal property to the missionary. Those things you have got in your home are full of evil spirits, said the missionary reverently. You must let me have them, so that I can take them to a holy place in England, where they would be destroyed. My grandfather stood up shakily and walked out of the mission hospital. He walked, and somewhere along the road he collapsed. And tribespeople who knew him took him to their village. And there, when a passing Afrikaner doctor rode by in his ox wagon, the black people asked this doctor, who was not a missionary, to please take care of my grandfather. The doctor took my grandfather aboard his ox wagon and took him to his farm far away. And there, the Afrikaner doctor, a herbalist really, as he was called, a Genees Jeren, he treated my grandfather free of charge, and he didn't place any conditions for his treatment. And my grandfather, out of gratitude, returned to his village a healthy man and took 3 fat cows and led them with his sons to the faraway home of the Afrikaner. Again and again, our people were robbed of their heritage. Our people were robbed of scientific equipment. Our people were robbed of irreplaceable artifacts, some of them dating back hundreds of years into the past, by the missionaries, especially the London Missionary Society. And if you go into that museum, Fred, near the docks in London, you will find what I saw, and it will make you weep.
What's your own experience in your life, Credo, of the use of Christianity in Africa to divide, rule, and suppress the people?
Now, let me tell you, when missionaries came to South Africa, they deliberately created a huge wave of enmity between those blacks that they converted and those blacks who resisted Christian conversion. They created such a divide that they actually broke up huge families. And it got worse when Catholics, Anglicans, Methodists, and Presbyterians spread through South Africa. There was developed deliberately in Africans of different religious denominations the same enmity that exists now between the Catholics and the Protestants in England. Black Protestants were forbidden from talking to black Catholics. Black Wesleyans did not even ask the time of day from black Presbyterians. It was such a total chaos, and the only beneficiaries were the missionaries themselves. But let me tell you more what is to be done. Missionaries used to forbid any converted Christian black from having anything whatsoever to do with an unconverted black. Love relationships between so-called heathen blacks and Catholic blacks were forbidden by the missionaries. That was how my father and my mother parted, traumatizing my life even before I was born. My father had been a confessing Catholic, and he fell in love with what was called a heathen Zulu woman. Now, the condition for such a love was that the woman had to submit herself into the Christian faith. And my grandfather, a fierce old warrior, contemptuously refused to have my mother become a Christian convert. I used to kill white men at Isandwa, and I am not going to allow a daughter of mine to follow the religion of spear food. And say, if in a mission station a church-going black paid court to a heathen black, the church-going black was brutally punished by the missionary, and he was punished in a way which to Africans was horrible. Inside the mission church, there were the pews, the benches on which the congregation sat. But next to the door, just as you entered the door of the church, there were special benches for those Christian blacks who had broken the law. And so, if it was found by the white missionary or the black missionary that a certain person had had anything to do with a heathen, that person was punished in a very terrible way. He or she was made to sit next to the door of the church inside, so that all who entered the church would look at this one and know that here is a lawbreaker who had broken the laws of Jesus Christ.
Were you pushed into the Christian religion to start with, Credo, before the penny dropped?
Yes, sir, I was. You see, after my mother and my father had separated, my mother gave birth to me. And for a long time, I suffered as a child because I was born illegitimate. I was called a bastard. I had no rights as a human being. The law of the Zulus at that time was very, very strict regarding illegitimate children. My mother suffered. She was often beaten up by other girls in the village. And I suffered too. Other children were forbidden from playing with me. And I headed cattle in the bush alone. And there, many strange things happened to me which do not concern us here, however. And when I was 7 years old, there came to my grandfather's village a brother of my father, and he asked to take me away from there. And my grandfather said, nothing could please me more than that this little bastard should be removed from my home. He is a disgrace to my family. And so I was taken by my father's brother to the south of Natal, where I was baptized as a Catholic, and the ridiculous name Credo was placed upon my head, a name I hate very much, even to this day. I grew up, sir, as a Catholic, and we were all Catholics in our home, as most people in Natal are. And then one day, after we had left Natal, my father left the Catholic Church and adopted one of the worst branches of the Christian religion that you can find. My father started following the teachings of an American woman called Mary Baker Eddy. She, who was the leader of the Christian Science Church. Under the laws of the Christian Science Church, you are not allowed to take medicine under any circumstances, no matter how seriously ill you are. And for years we suffered, my half-sisters and my half-brothers and I. We sickened and we were not allowed to take any medicament. We had suffered before under the Catholic Church, having to confess sins every weekend to a priest we could barely see. Sometimes it was so ridiculous that we often created sins against ourselves we had not committed in order to please the Catholic Father. And now we were suffering under the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy, teachings which I now see in my adult life as having been the very essence of the purest rubbish. Then, after a great sickness in 1937, I was taken, during that great sickness, I was taken back to Zululand by my father's brother, Anton.